Have you ever stopped to think about how AI assistants like ChatGPT went from this fascinating but kind of weird novelty to a tool that's actually genuinely helpful? Well, it turns out there's an incredible story behind that change. Today, we're going to trace that exact journey, how AI learned not just to be smart, but to be helpful, honest, and harmless.
So let's just start with the one question that really drives this whole thing. How does a piece of software, right, a bunch of code and data, how does it actually learn a human sense of right and wrong? How do we teach it to, follow our instructions and actually align with our values?
To really get this, we've got to go back a bit. The first truly massive language models, like the original GPT-3, were an absolute game changer. I mean, the stuff they could write was stunningly human-like. But they had this one huge, glaring problem. They were completely unpredictable and totally unaligned with what you actually wanted them to do.
And this alignment problem was a massive roadblock. You could ask a model to do one thing, and it might just do something else entirely. It could totally ignore you, make things up, or even spit out harmful or toxic stuff. It was like having a brilliant student with absolutely no sense of direction or ethics. So, the big question was, how do you tame this raw power?
Well, the first major answer came from OpenAI, with a method that would pretty much change everything. They figured that to make an AI act more human, you needed, well, humans. This is where reinforcement learning from human feedback comes into the story.
RLHF, that's what everyone calls it, it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's a system for teaching an AI by using human preferences as its guide. So instead of just trying to predict the next word in a sentence, the AI starts learning to predict what kind of answer a human would actually like.
Okay, so this slide breaks down exactly how it works, and it's a really fascinating three-step process. First up, you've got supervised fine-tuning. Just think of this as giving the AI a study guide. You have actual people writing perfect, high-quality answers to teach the AI what a good response even looks like. Then, in step 2, those humans become judges. They get a bunch of AI-generated answers, and they just rank them from best to worst. All of that ranking data is then used to train a separate AI, called a reward model, which basically learns to think like a human judge. And finally, in the third step, the main AI is set loose with one goal: generate answers that get the highest possible score from that reward model. It's this brilliant feedback loop, completely guided by human taste.
And this isn't just some theory in a lab somewhere. This exact process is what made ChatGPT possible. It's the secret sauce that took these models from being unpredictable text machines to the helpful assistants we use all the time. But, as amazing as it was, this human-first approach had a pretty major flaw. And that brings us to the next chapter in our story, the supervision bottleneck. Because it turns out that relying on humans for every single judgment call, well, it creates a massive new problem of its own. And when I say massive, I mean it. To get one of these models trained up properly using RLHF, researchers needed tens of thousands of these human-provided labels. That's thousands upon thousands of rankings, judgments, and example answers written out by hand.
And this right here is the heart of the problem. Relying on people at this scale is incredibly slow, and it is so expensive. You can't just keep hiring more and more people forever. The process itself becomes the bottleneck, holding back how quickly these AI systems can improve.
This huge limitation led researchers, especially a team at Anthropic, to ask a really fascinating and, frankly, critical question. What if? What if you could take the human out of the loop, at least for some of it? Could an AI actually learn to supervise itself?
And the answer to that question led to the next major evolution in this whole story: constitutional AI. This was a totally new idea for how to get values into an AI, not by having a human rank every single output, but by giving the AI a set of principles it had to follow.
This quote from the original research paper just sums it up perfectly. The core idea is to give the AI a constitution, a short list of rules, like, hey, avoid giving harmful advice, or politely push back on unethical requests. And that constitution becomes the AI's own internal guide for what's right and wrong.
So how does this actually work? Well, it's this really cool two-phase process. First, there's the supervised learning part. The model gets a prompt and generates a response. Then, and this is the wild part, it uses the constitution to critique its own response and then rewrites it to be better. It is literally learning from its own self-correction. Then you get the reinforcement learning phase, which some people call RLAIF. That's reinforcement learning from AI feedback. Here, a different AI model, also guided by the Constitution, acts as the judge, ranking all the different responses. This creates all the training data you need, but without a human having to look at every single one. The AI becomes both the student and the teacher.
So all of this sounds great in theory, but did it actually work? Let's take a look at the results and see how this whole AI teaching AI idea really stacks up against the original human-led approach.
I mean, this is the million-dollar question, right? Can an AI, guided only by a written set of rules, actually produce a model that's just as good or maybe even better than one trained on tens of thousands of direct human judgments?
Okay, let's break this chart down, because the results here are absolutely fascinating. The goal for any model is to be in the top right corner. The vertical axis is harmlessness, so higher is better. The horizontal axis is helpfulness, so further to the right is better. Now look at the blue and orange lines. Those are the models trained the old way, with all that human feedback. Then look at the gray and black lines. Those are the models trained with constitutional AI. The result is just stunning. The AI-trained models are way more harmless. They're much higher up on the chart. And they did it without sacrificing any of their helpfulness. They actually outperformed the models trained directly by humans.
So let's just put this all side by side. With the old way, RLHF, the feedback comes from human labelers, guided by their own individual preferences. It works, but it's really expensive, and it's a huge pain to scale up. With constitutional AI, the feedback comes from another AI, and it's guided by a clear, written constitution. It's just incredibly efficient and easy to scale.
And this new approach has some massive advantages. First, it pretty much eliminates the need for all that expensive, large-scale human labeling. And as we just saw in the chart, it creates models that are better at being both helpful and harmless. It also solves this subtle but really important problem where earlier models would just get evasive and say, "I'm sorry, I can't answer that." These new models can actually explain why a request is harmful, which is so much more transparent and useful for the user. So the big takeaway here is that this isn't just some small little tweak. This move from direct human supervision to AI supervision, guided by a constitution, is a really fundamental shift. It allows for way more precise control over how an AI behaves, and it makes the whole process more transparent because the rules are literally written down for everyone to see.
And all of this brings us to our final and maybe the most important question of all. If an AI's values and its behaviors are going to be shaped by a written constitution, the most critical question becomes, who gets to write it? That's a question we're all going to have to think about as these incredibly powerful systems continue to evolve.